LiSTNR production.
Through the course of this interview, you'll hear the name Jones in relation to an alleged offender. We've chosen not to use his full name as he has consistently denied any involvement in the case we'll be discussing. We last spoke with former Victorian detective Charlie Bezzina on Crime Insiders in 2023. He'd been involved in the investigation into the death of Australian cricket legend David Hookes, who died after being punched outside a pub in 2004. Charlie also gave us an unprecedented look at the killing of Alphonse Gangitano and the chaos which preceded it, and the Frankston serial killer Paul Denyer and how he was caught. Charlie's back again to tell us about a case he's working on as a private detective, something he's been working on since 2011. I'm former police officer Brent Sanders, and for the past 25 years, I've dedicated myself to sharing what I've learnt on the force to the Australian public so they can better protect themselves from falling victim to crime. So with the help of some of the most respected current and former detectives and high-ranking law enforcement agents, we're going to pull back the curtain on what life is like on the force and what they've learned about how crime and criminals really work. These are real stories from real detectives. Charlie, welcome back to Crime Insiders. It's been 2 years since we last spoke. Tell us about the disappearance of 12-year-old Terry Floyd.
28th of June 1975, 12-year-old Terry Floyd was at Maryborough. He lived in Maryborough and he's playing football that particular morning, as he did every Saturday morning. Went to the footy ground, basically finished the game shortly after 11 o'clock that morning. The plan, unbeknownst to his parents, was that he was going to go camping with a couple of lads from Avoca. Now, Avoca, for the ones that don't know, it is an adjoining town to Maryborough, a lot smaller town. Along the Pyrenees Highway, joins the town of Avoca and Maryborough. He got actually dropped off by a fellow from the football club, drove him to this location in the Pyrenees Highway, opposite the swimming pool. And I say that because that'll become important as I continue the events. So he dropped him off there. Terry walked into town. He was there to meet outside one of the shops, meet two of his childhood friends. They were going to go camping. Terry had been running late. So the young lads, before mobile phone days, didn't know where he was, so they left and went camping. So that basically left Terry at Avoca. Now, the plan was he was going to be picked up by the same chap who dropped him off on the Sunday morning. He was going to be collected. So what Terry did, walk to one of the homes of the young lads and said, is this particular lad there? No, he's already gone camping. Went to the other house where the other lad lived. His father said, no, he's gone camping. And with that, Terry went to the local post office. And there he knew a young lad, the postmaster's son. And they basically started playing the game in the lounge room floor. Whilst they're playing the game, it comes about 4:30. He then says, well, I've got to start heading back. He initially told them that he was going to get picked up. And I think he said that because he didn't want them to worry. And I think in his mind, he was going to hitchhike back to Maryborough. And in those days, it was a norm thing. Maryborough was probably about 25, 30 k's away along the Pyrenees Highway. So young Greg Jess was his mate. He walked him to the corner of the Pyrenees Highway and the Sunraysia Highway at that shopping centre. He left him there and Terry started walking on the Pyrenees Highway, walking towards Maryborough. It was last time that Greg Jess saw him, and then a couple of other witnesses then saw him thereafter and never been seen alive again or his location at all.
So he's missing. Charlie, what happened next?
That then started the parents to report him missing later on that evening. They looked for a few places. Unfortunately, the police didn't take it seriously because they said, look, he's run away. He'll come home when he's hungry. The parents had said, look, instead about running away previous times, not that he had. And so the fact it wasn't taken seriously for at least a week or so from police attention, it just didn't happen. It didn't happen at all. And eventually he was reported missing. They started a search that point onwards. And it wasn't until about 2 weeks later, when the report of Terry Floyd being reported missing, a particular witness was at her home looking out her lounge room window. She worked at the local post office at 5 o'clock. She was starting a shift. As she's looking out her window, she sees a young lad working on the Pyrenees Highway, some 150 metres away. And she knows all the boys in town and said, basically, I don't know that young lad. Her vision was then obscured by a house, and next to the house was another vacant paddock. Then she sees a cream fawn-coloured panel van, Holden panel van, also driving along the Pyrenees Highway, and her vision is then blocked of this particular panel van. So clearly the panel van has stopped, as per the young lad, because their direction didn't continue past the house, which would have given her vision. The next thing that she sees is the panel van pulling out slowly from the side of the roadway and driving along the Pyrenees Highway. She took no more notice of it. She then walked down to the highway from her house, 150 metres away, looked up the Pyrenees Highway, didn't see the young lad at all. Goes to work. A week or so later, the media came out. Terry Floyd's been missing. This is a picture of him. She then says, that's the same lad that I saw on the highway with this Holden panel van.
So, Charlie, the police became involved.
So she contacts the Maryborough the police. They come and pick her up. Patricia Mitchell, her name was, and took her to the Maryborough police station, and they took her to a Maryborough caravan park. And they said to her, can you pick the car that you saw earlier in the highway? Can you pick the car in this caravan park? And nearby was a Holden panel van, but she couldn't pick this particular motor car. She said, no, I can't pick the car that I saw. It might have been a panel van or a ute with a canopy on the back. So it's clear at that stage that the police had this particular person, a fellow called Jones, as a suspect. She's the very first witness that rings up and says, I saw that boy with this Holden panel van on the Pyrenees Highway at or very close to the location of the swimming pool where he was initially dropped off. So they've taken her that the very same day she reports to the caravan park to be able to pick up this panel van. Jones is the driver of a fawn, light-coloured Holden panel van. At that particular stage, Jones is on bail. He'd been charged with interfering with another 12-year-old boy in Ballarat. He's a convicted pedophile. He was 23 years of age at the time, and subsequently was convicted of that offence in Ballarat and served a term of imprisonment.
Now, police have someone in their sights. Charlie, what happens next?
So eventually the investigation then continues. Jones is then interviewed probably over a 1 year or 2 year period. He's interviewed 4 or 5 times by different investigators. The investigation is taken over by the Ballarat detectives, which is another major town that looked after the Avoca area. It was then eventually given a cold case. This is where Ron Iddles became involved in it. He then compiled an inquest brief. He couldn't progress it any further. And that's when it was basically become dormant until my involvement with Daryl Floyd. And then I can go into what I've been able to uncover and the frustrations that I and Daryl continue to have with our missing persons unit. And this is 100% solvable case.
Charlie, was there an inquest, a coroner's inquest into Terry's disappearance?
They had an inquest. It was an open finding. They accepted he died at unknown location by unknown means by unknown persons.
Was the suspect's van searched at the time, Charlie?
During the early stages, a search warrant was undertaken of that panel van by the Ballarat detectives. They located a pair of stained overalls in the back of the panel van to be taken for forensic examination. We come into the investigation. Where's those overalls? Oh, we've lost them. Were the overalls forensically examined? Oh, we don't know. They then seized a number of other items. Where are they? Oh, they've been lost. I then identified a particular witness, an eyewitness, who knew Jones driving down the Pyrenees Highway at the same time, basically, or very near to Patricia Mitchell. Her evidence is she was driving down, sees a fallen panel van on the Pyrenees Highway at the same location that Patricia Mitchell sees the van, and a small boy. She sees the van. Behind the driver's wheel, she says, was Jones. At the side of that car was Terry Floyd. When the balloon goes up, she reports it to the Avoca police station and wasn't taken seriously. She was told to go on her way. No statement was taken, nothing happened. So she never went back to the police, nor did the police ever see her again. She unfortunately died in 2021. But the police knew of her existence and no one ever followed her up. And with my involvement, then I identified the daughter, Rowena Gribble. She was a district nurse, later called Elizabeth Gribble's a district nurse, very highly credentialed, upstanding citizen in Maryborough. She actually was a theatre nurse for Weary Dunlop back in the 40s. So she's a very, very upstanding citizen. And finally, her daughter saw a crime program by Ron Iddles, who actually covered the Floyd story. And he made mention of a nurse being spoken to. And Rowena, the daughter, said, well, there's no one ever spoke to my mother at all. So she then cracked Crime Stoppers to report the fact that her mother had seen Jones with Terry Floyd on the 28th of June at this particular location in the Pyrenees Highway.
Did anyone ever follow up that call to Crime Stoppers?
12 months later, 1 year later, she was contacted by the Missing Persons Unit and she gave her story to them. They took a statement off her and basically left it at that. Over that period of time also, there was another witness that lived diagonally opposite the intersection of the Pyrenees Highway and the Sunraysia Highway. Now, he sees the two boys, Greg Jess and Terry Floyd, at that location, takes no notice of it. He then drives up the Pyrenees Highway, some 5 kilometres up the highway, sometime later, to a place which is intersected at Box Flat Track. Box Flat Track is the actual mine shaft that Daryl Floyd now continues to search for Terry's remains. And we've got indications that support that he may well be in that mine shaft. As he's driving up to that location, he sees the cream panel van on one side of the road, and on the other side of the road is a small boy. Takes no notice of it, goes to the mine shaft where Daryl is now continuing the search, drops off some offal into there because there's a local rubbish tip, this particular mine shaft. He comes back onto the Pyrenees Highway, sees the panel van still at the same location, doesn't see anyone else, but does not see the boy at that particular time and goes home. He doesn't report his sightings to the police, not for some time, months or whatever it was later, because he thought he might get in trouble in dumping the rubbish down that mine shaft. But he eventually comes to the police and tells them about his sighting. So they already knew about him years ago. So the police knew about that. They did know about Elizabeth Gribble's evidence, though. I identified that. I then took a statement off Rowena Gribble, her daughter. Now, all in the view of corroborating what Elizabeth Gribble, her mother, had seen, because there is a section in our Evidence Act that allows an exception rule to hearsay evidence being admitted. So my job was to go and try and find as many people as I can to corroborate Elizabeth Gribble. I then went and located 2 ex-employees that she worked with. Another nurse, she made mention to her what she had seen in relation to the boy and the location more often than not. Then I located another person she worked with at the hospital who actually said Gribble had said to him, I saw the van with Jones and the small boy Terry Floyd at the same location. And then I find another witness who was driving up the Pyrenees Highway and said he sees a small boy, again, at the very same location as all these other witnesses, near the swimming pool. Takes no notice of it, drives home. He lives on the highway, a short distance up the highway. And being on the highway, he's got these dogs he goes hunting with. If anybody walks along the Pyrenees Highway, the dogs will go berserk. What he then says when I interviewed him, and the police spoke to him in the day, he then says, nobody walked past my house because the dogs did not go berserk, which then eliminates the fact that Terry Floyd was hitchhiking that way. What we say is that Terry Floyd, at the point of Patricia Mitchell seeing him on the side of the highway, is already in the back of the panel van or in the panel van with Jones. And for whatever reason, they then stop 5 kilometres up the road when my other witness sees the panel van and the boy on the side of the road. So clearly there's no movement by Terry Floyd from the swimming pool location past the house, what we call Dobley. His name is Mervyn Dobley. His dogs don't react, so therefore we take it that no one walked past his house. The detectives at the time speak to him, did not take a statement from him. I took a statement from him.
Charlie, was the suspect able to provide an alibi?
The big push from our perspective was I could corroborate Ribble's evidence. The police had lost these valuable exhibits. We don't know what the stain on the overalls were. The interview of Jones with another close associate of his called Graham Wardlaw, they were together previous to 5 p.m. that Saturday. They were together, they say, working in a panel shop in Sunraysia Highway in Avoca. We have been able to disprove their alibi. They weren't where they say they were.
Look, I should just interject there and say Wardlaw and Jones dispute the claims that they worked at the garage at Avoca on the day in question.
Wardlaw now lives in Queensland and Jones lives up in the northern part of the state in Victoria.
Charlie, that brings us up to today. Where is your investigation at this stage?
Essentially where we're at the moment is there was a particular electronic device warrant taken out on Jones back in 75. We have put all this new evidence to missing persons and saying, well, we want you to take out a similar warrant that will allow police to gather evidence. They tell us that they've presented that evidence to their lawyer before progressing it to a court to issue the warrant, and they've said the lawyers rejected the new evidence or rejected going and making an application for this new warrant, electronic warrant. We don't know why. So Daryl and I have said we want an audience with this lawyer to explain to us why, with this new evidence, you are not progressing this particular warrant to gather evidence in a specific way, which I won't go into. They said that will not happen. So we're in argument with missing persons. We're telling them how to suck eggs. They're saying, well, they're saying it's privileged information. Privileged information belongs to the client. The client in this case is the Chief Commissioner. If the Chief Commissioner says you can meet with Daryl and Charlie and explain to them what he basically said was, in his own words, this current application for this warrant to gather evidence does not change the nature of the first warrant back in 75. Not only does it change the nature, it absolutely strengthens it with the eyewitnesses that I have uncovered. They're flatly refusing to progress it, not telling us why, and what they're saying is they'll apply now to the state coroner to set aside the first finding of the first inquest and have a new inquest with my new witnesses. And as we know, there's no rules of evidence at a coronial inquest. We can then lead the statements that I've taken and the evidence of Elizabeth Gribble at a coroner's court. But from my experience, there's no impediment that this lawyer would reject the affidavit that's been allegedly put in by missing persons to apply for another warrant to be able to gather new evidence from these witnesses in a specific way. So that's the frustration we've had. Apart from the incompetency of the initial investigation and now the continued fight of me accessing the file being refused, their refusal to help us and let us know, their accountability, there is none. And now we've got a particular podcast running, the bully in the gold mine.
Yep, I want to talk about the podcast, but before we do, tell us about Terry's brother, Daryl. He's digging at the gold mine shaft you touched on earlier.
He's spent over $100,000 of his own money. He's got volunteers, but someone's got to pay for the diesel for excavators. It's over 160 feet deep. It was used as a local tip by the locals, sewerage and the likes. We say that it's a location because that's the same location where this witness saw the panel van parked on the side of the road 5 kilometres out of Avoca. In doing the excavation, Daryl located a silver chain necklace, very, very similar, if not identical, to the same one that Daryl has and that Terry had. We know what Terry was wearing at the time. He was wearing in those days what we call the high heel shoes that boys in those days wore with a big heel. Daryl was located a particular shoe to that era, which is similar to what he had. He's also located because in those days, and we still today, people wear the Miller shirts, the press stud Miller shirts. Daryl was able to locate, or through his mine searches, the actual press studs to a Miller shirt. So there are indications, and Daryl has even taken that chain to the actual jeweller in Maryborough and was able to say that is of the era because in those days they used to solder the links and there's a dot of solder and modern day doesn't do that. And where we are with the mine shaft at the moment is, whilst the government have given some $50,000 to assist in the mine search, they have walked away from it. We're currently still in negotiations through the shadow police minister that's put it up to the current premier to give us further funding of another $100,000 to complete the search. That's the big hiccup at the moment, that we're still waiting for funding. We've got a GoFundMe page, even though they say they're volunteers. We've got excavators and the likes. Daryl is very confident we'll get to the bottom of the shaft if we had the money. But we could probably offset all of that if they were able to apply for this warrant and we could get evidence probably from the actual offender who might tell us where their body is. And that's a priority, is finding the remains is our priority. Second priority is bringing someone to justice, who we still say is implicit in the main suspect being Jones. So that's a whole short frustration period that we continue to go through and arm wrestle with the Victoria Police Missing Persons Unit, offering my services all pro bono. I've been assisting him all these years and continue to assist him because Daryl's got nobody else. Hopefully the coroner will set aside the first finding, but we want to find Terry's remains. We want to bring someone to justice.
Coming up, why wasn't more done 50 years ago to try and find Terry Floyd or to bring those responsible for his disappearance to justice? Charlie, firstly, mate, thank you so much for this detailed sort of insight into this case. I've been sort of taking a few notes as we're rolling through, and there's some obvious questions here to ask. And I mean, you and I both know that you go back to 1975, we could excuse the fact that perhaps, policing wasn't at a level then as it is today, or it was in the 90s and things, DNA and everything else, but just little things too, like, this little fella, he's 12 years of age. He's been missing for 2 weeks before it becomes a missing persons case. I mean, there's a little bit of a glaring issue there. Even allowing for all that, you've laid out the evidence, and I think even to a lay person, what you've told us in the last 15 minutes, it's pretty compelling. It's pretty convincing evidence. And Charlie, you're not some bloke that's gone out and got a private detective's license because you've watched a few TV shows. You got 39 years experience in the job at a high-ranking investigative detective, what have you. The second part of this, there's the incompetency going back 50 years to what should have been done. Perhaps even more frustrating is this seeming desire currently to not want to revisit and things such as that. So I guess the obvious question is, we can put some of the 1975 stuff, I guess, down to being a bit slack, a bit tardy. Things like paedophilia and things, they weren't really terms that were floated around too much back in that day. But we're now talking 2025, and there's a part of me that thinks, and goodness, you've been around the block many times, Charlie, this wouldn't be the first pedophile who's sort of been protected, sadly, by those in positions of power. Are we talking just obstinance, just wanting to save the flag, or are we going right back and perhaps it's a small town, people know this guy, somebody wanted to protect him or somebody didn't want him to be investigated. What are your thoughts, Charlie? Where's this all coming from?
I don't believe that's the case because with this new world that we now live in, that everyone's still very forefront of the mind of the Avoca people and the Maryborough people. There is no sort of protection of pedophilia. And when you start these investigations, the place is pretty much awash with other pedophiles in the area. Why Elizabeth Gribble was actually not taken notice of is because the police at that stage had another pedophile in their sights. It was actually the mayor's son, the Maryborough mayor's son, who actually was the person who drove him to that location on the Saturday and was going to pick them up, and he was very close with the football club. So they had tunnel vision in those days. So I don't think it was a situation, Brent, of sort of protecting anybody. Sure, Jones had been convicted of the Ballarat assault on the 12-year-old boy there and served 3 years imprisonment. And to add a bit more to it, whilst he's in jail, he had a 1969 Holden panel van. It was a Fawn. And in 75, he goes and is incarcerated for just short of 3 years. And during that period of incarceration, he had someone paint the panel van a bright orange. And he then says, the paint was fading. Well, it's near off a 5-year-old motor car. Absolute nonsense. And to me, and as you know, Brent, consciousness of guilt. So you've gone from a Fawn one to absolutely an outlandish orange colour. So if there's any witnesses, no, my panel van's orange. Couldn't have been me. Even the little things like that all tell us a story and build up. And why the current investigators are obstinate in not being able to be more open with us, they've allowed the media to actually sit down and go through investigation files in the past. But I'm not a media person. I'm an investigator with 17 years homicide experience, and I would like to think I've got some credentials. I could add a fresh set of eyes on the investigation and make sure every rabbit is run down its burrow. But for whatever reason, I give all the undertakings. I do not want to embarrass anybody. I will not be highlighting the incompetencies of having the lost exhibits, how the investigation was conducted. All we want, me, Daryl, and I assume the police, is to find Terry's remains, but they've walked away from the mine search. It's left to Terry to do. Well, having a family member search for the remains of a loved one is absolutely shocking.
And you say the missing persons unit isn't doing its job.
They've walked away from their own ethos. The ethos is, we keep hearing it, and the propaganda. We will never give up. We will never leave any stone unturned in trying to locate and give answers to the families. Well, they are leaving a stone not unturned by not applying for this warrant. They're not going on a fishing expedition. As my experience, and I've applied for many of the similar warrants as a police officer, I know the evidence is there. There is no impediment in applying for it. They're not going to look silly. What I then said to them, let an independent arbitrator, a Supreme Court judge say, you know what, guys, I don't think you've got enough. We would accept that. But to have one person, a subjective person in this lawyer, stroke of a pen to say, no, I'm not going to put it up to the judge. Well, why not? We now want to know why. I know there's more than ample evidence there. Why will you not put it up? And what do you lose by putting it up? It's not as if you're going to be embarrassed. The evidence is there. We're not going on a fishing expedition. You can quite rightly and justifiably go to a Supreme Court judge and say, I believe there's enough there. That's how the whole process works. It's independently adjudicated by someone independent being a Supreme, but they won't even do that. And then they won't give us a reason for it. Why? We don't know why they've been so obstructionist to us. This is the deceased family, and we keep bringing them back. Put aside his 50 years this year. Put aside that. We keep bringing him back to the stage. This is a 12-year-old boy that's been abducted off the Pyrenees Highway and murdered. If that happened yesterday, different attitude, but Why should the attitude change, even though it was mucked up from the start? Let's pick up the pieces now as a new missing persons unit or cold case unit in Victoria Police and give it all we've got. I can't even appreciate to say, well, if we allow Daryl and Charlie to speak with this lawyer and get the reasons, we'll go away and wait for the coronial inquest if we get another coronial inquest. But we keep fighting them for that and fighting back and fro. And I don't get it. I don't get it why they just won't do it.
I can hear the frustration in your voice, Charlie. And you talk about the cost involved, both the time and volunteers and the monetary costs involved with excavating a mine shaft. Just take you back there. You're using big machinery to excavate dirt, I guess, out of this mine shaft. And in amongst that, they've found a gold chain and press studs belonging to a shirt. So they're taking this dirt out, and what are they, almost like putting it through a sieve to try and find evidence? I mean, this is a painstaking process to be undertaken by Daryl, the brother of the deceased.
Just to give you an idea, this mine shaft is about the size of a circumference of a 44-gallon drum. So they go down, they fill up the bucket comes up. The bucket goes into, it's dumped on the ground. A bobcat comes in, picks up the bucket, and we've made up a big sieve. It's sieved through that. The dirt that's sieved, we then go through what's left, the big bones, because a lot of animal bones were dumped down there. Engine blocks, you name it, was a tip. Bobcat then picks up the sieved dirt. That's then put at another location. We then do have a cadaver dog. This is a cadaver dog that Victoria Police don't have, but we have a personal one. It's a privately owned cadaver dog from Frankston. That's what they do. It's been a trained dog that finds human remains. So they come up from Melbourne every so often, and they run over the heap of dirt that's been sieved. So we've got the sieve, we've got a cadaver dog, we've got visual examination, all being done by a family member. And, we are confident that this is the remaining place of Terry Floyd.
Charlie, how is Daryl himself holding up?
Daryl is suffering significantly mental anguish that he has, mental anguish of doing the search himself, mental anguish that he's suffered for all his years in doing the search on his own and the kickback from Victoria Police. And I've been able to give him that momentum by giving him the advice back to Victoria Police. And with me being on board, the wall has just got higher and thicker and stopping us even more. So this whole mental anguish with Daryl, it's taking a toll on him and now getting the funds to finish the mine search. If we get to the bottom of that mine, we've got nowhere else to look and it's not there. But he's not going to give up till the day he dies. Another major impact way back in 75, and you'll be astonished with this, there was 2 years difference between Daryl and Terry. Terry was the older brother, and they actually dressed up Daryl in the same clothing that Terry Floyd was wearing at the time and put him in that same location. So the police also knew to put Daryl at the location where Terry Floyd, in fact, was being supported by these new witnesses. We don't know how the police knew that. Again, working in a vacuum. And the trauma that's had on Daryl goes past and he hates going to Avoca. He is absolutely traumatised by having been dressed up by the police, put at that location and see who stopped at him, because he believed he was going to be abducted also as a 10-year-old. And that trauma follows him. And the trauma that goes on, all we get back from Victoria Police is, make sure you get looked after with your psychologist and psychiatrist. They fail to realise they are part of the problem of Daryl's mental anguish in being obstructionist, in giving us all that they know. I don't get it. I don't really understand it. I put myself as a lead investigator. I'll be saying, Daryl, come in. This is all we've got. Daryl's not a suspect. The Floyd family aren't suspects. Why aren't they open and frank with us? You have to be frank and fair to an accused person. We don't even get that privilege as a victim's family in Daryl. We don't get that luxury from Victoria Police. It's absolutely devastating for poor old Daryl let alone what Daryl goes through. I get heated up with Daryl, and Daryl's calming me down because I know that something he shouldn't be going through. They work for us. They being Victoria Police. We are their customers. There's a victims charter of what police must do, keeping us appraised. They go away if they don't fulfil that, the victims charter, in assisting victims of crime, what Daryl is. So the frustrations continue to grow, Brent, and it's, it'll be the death of us, but we're not going to stop one way down. We'll keep rattling cages. We've got an election coming up next year. I know the Shadow Police Minister down here, David Southwick, who I've recently written to on behalf of Daryl. And as I said earlier, he's then referred it now to the Premier, who will then refer it to the Police Minister and see whether we get some fundings and say, well, yeah, because that was promised to us by Daniel Andrews, the previous Minister, to Jacinda Allen, who said, Daryl, you do not have to worry about, and it's got a quoting, Daryl, you do not have to worry about looking for money to complete the search for your brother. We will do that as a government. And they've reneged on that. So we're trying to keep the government at the promise of Daniel Andrews that they will meet the cost. They just recently spent $3 million on improving Luna Park in Victoria. They've spent $80 million on the elephant enclosure. They've spent other big money on the Grand Prix garages. We're asking for $100,000 for a devastated family to complete this mine search. I don't get what they don't get.
Charlie, I know that you've come on here to put some sunlight onto this case, and I know that you've also been very involved in another podcast, The Boy in the Goldmine, and you and I, we both hope that by just airing this, just by getting people to hear this and to share some of that frustration. You've got a new commissioner arriving down there, mate, in a month's time down there in Victoria. Maybe a new set of eyes on this. You can rattle a few cages and who knows, because as a reasonable person sitting here listening to what you're telling me, I guess, pardon me, as an ex-copper, you're almost at a loss to go, well, what is it with this case? Why this obstinance? Why the pushback? It seems like such a simple case to pick up and run with. And you and I know there's a lot of good coppers, good detectives in Victoria who'd be thinking the same as you, are still currently in the job. Give it to me. I'll run with it. I'll investigate it. But it's weirdly, there's something stopping that from happening. And we're 50 years on, and I'd imagine the passion of Daryl, Terry's brother, is as strong as it is today as it was probably from day one. And look, I only hope that the small part that we can play by airing this story to our listeners can in some way, keep applying some pressure and see if we get some leverage on it.
Yeah, as we both know, the importance of keeping it in the public mind. This is where podcasts are so important to us. And Daryl and I continue to do media releases up in Avoca, Maryborough. We're going to be up there on the 20th of June of this year, having the memorial, the 50th year memorial. We'll have the media coverage on that. The local Shire Council have agreed, and they're putting in place a memorial within the main street of Avoca, a rose garden, as it were, reflecting back on Terry. I've done a number of cases, and you may have been similar, where the family have got nowhere to go to respect the remains of their loved ones. Daryl's got that mine, and, whilst he gives him shivers going to that location, he's got nowhere else to go. And the other memorial, he's put up his own memorial cross in the bush at the location where the van was seen by this other witness and young Terry. And by us alone keeping in the public awareness, we've had witnesses ringing us up all the time and saying, yep, I saw this, or I believe there's a gravesite here. We did one as late as last week, a potential gravesite. We will follow that through where police won't. We've had another witness last year who believed he identified a gravesite, and the response he got from missing persons eventually, after 12 months or 18 months, when he reported to the Crime Stoppers, we don't have the resources to go and dig this hole up. So we sent one of our miners to the coordinates we were given, and we dug it up. It's a process of elimination, as we know. But we just can't get missing we are busy. We've got other cases. But how many other cases you've got such a strong suspect? Podcasts play such an important role for us in unsolved cases. We know that that particular case up at the Dawson case up in Sydney was solved through basically, or big breakthrough was through a podcast. So appreciate giving the airtime to be able to highlight the podcast of Boy in the Mine, your podcast, highlighting it to a different audience, and I hope we can continue to get some more information coming through.
Let's hope so, mate. And and as we move forward on this, Charlie, more than welcome to come back on board any time. If anything new comes to light or anything, we can just keep. Yeah, it's the squeaky wheel that gets oiled, mate, isn't it? We just got to keep agitating.
Correct. And I might say that, I certainly had a lot of support from Shane Patton, the previous Chief Commissioner. He was supporting us, and as we know, with the vote of no confidence, we lost him to the job. And now we've got Mr. Bush coming on, and I'm pretty confident that once the dust settles, that he might be another avenue that I can apply to that will bring some common sense to this whole investigation.
Charlie, as I said at the opening of our chat, it's a pleasure to have you back on board. Almost 2 years ago to the day, you and I first chatted, and we spoke about other cases, the David Hooks case down there, the Frankston serial killer. If you're nothing, you're passionate, mate, and I know that when you came on board to talk about this 50-year-old case of this young fella, it's that passion that you had when you're in the job, which you still have now, just for the right thing to be done, in this case, by this family. So, Charlie, I just want to thank you so much again, mate, for not only just for your 39 years of service to the good people of Victoria, but, your continued service, and in this case to this family, and I'm sure, and there's many others that I'm sure that you've reached out and done work with, and I only hope that in our small way here, by you and I having this yarn, that we can just keep that pressure on and bring this thing to a conclusion. But Charlie, great to see you again after a couple of years. Thank you so much for taking the time to drop in and have a chat.
Likewise, Brent, anytime.
Our guest this week was Charlie Bezzina. The podcast we talked about is called The Boy in the Gold Mine. You can find it where you listen to your podcasts. Join us next week for another episode of Crime Insiders Forensics. It will be in your feed early Monday morning.